Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Tennis Channel Inside In. We're on the Tennis Channel podcast. Mitch Michals from the Santa Monica studios, recapping another U.S. Open, another major tennis season in the books. Joined now by one of the leaders in the analytical, data-driven community. She hosts 3 podcasts with Gil Gross and Joel Drucker. You can see her on a lot of publications, including Tennis Connected, where she put out some great content during the U.S. Open. Amy Lundy, welcome back to the podcast.
Mitch, always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, this is good. I had to get my resident, big 3, now big 1 expert on here with Djokovic winning another major, and there's a lot to dive into there. Starting with this, I wanted to ask anyone that, was actually there, and you were, there a lot of days as we were talking about before we started. And I know as a student of the game and as an expert in the field, there are always new things and new challenges that come to mind and new observations. What stood out to you, if you can just, your initial reaction to that question, what stood out from being there that maybe you weren't expecting or you were surprised to see?
The number one thing that stood out to me was the heat and the humidity. I've been to a lot of sporting events in my life. I've covered things in Central Florida in the month of August, which is excruciatingly hot. And I have never been to something that had this level of swamp-like heat and humidity for such an extended period of time. And it wasn't at the very start of the tournament, but it picked up probably around the start of the second week, and it just did not let up, and it still hasn't let up. It's still humid in our area, but it's supposed to break tomorrow. But how the players handled that and the strategy, maybe some of the more workhorse counterpuncher type players leaning into that strategy and trying to, break the will and take the legs of the players who maybe don't play in the heat and the humidity and the oppressive conditions quite as well.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, you can look at it a couple different ways. There's a lot of criticism of how certain things were handled, decisions that were made, maybe means that aren't there, like air conditioning. But it is a major, and it's a fitness test, especially on the men's side, and you have to be ramping up for this run. And it's kind of fascinating too, because you can tie together both tournaments, Amy, right? Like if you gear up for these tournaments, if you peak at the right time, Djokovic is a great example, but even someone like Coco Gauff or players that have had major success, this is the end goal. I know the season's not over and there's a lot of other tournaments, but you have to play your best this time of year. And it's easy to say that, but it's another thing to go out there and do it.
Oh, and Coco Gauff, the tournament that she had was unforgettable and so well managed. I think back to her first round match against Laura Siegemund, and she dropped a set, and Laura was, duly and rightly had qualified for the tournament for the main draw and was playing at a very slow pace, and Coco had to manage that and get through it, and she made her feelings known to the chair umpire, not in a crazy or obnoxious way, but just felt that she had to get that off her chest, and then was able to win the match. And when I think of everything that happened to her throughout the tournament, all her matches, the protester that delayed her match for 45 minutes, it was just an incredible way to manage the conditions for Coco Gauff.
Yeah, we can start with her, 19 years old, US Open champ, and someone that we're expecting to be around for a long time. Still had to go out there and win that first major because there's this pressure that comes with being a prodigy that she knows better than anyone. Being around and a seasoned vet at 19 is a remarkable feat in and of itself, but she went the distance. She overcame adversity. In the final itself, it is a testament to, I think, I would say positivity, but also just staying in the fight because there's going to be adversity in a tennis match, especially when you're on the grandest stage. Didn't have her best first set, but reset, stayed in it, waited for an opening, and found one. I think of all the things and of all the technical side of her game that we can break down, it's that ability to not let the moment be too big and know that there is going to be an opportunity to get back into the match that really sets her apart from her peers and, it sets her on a path for greatness.
It was what she did to really change her game and change her forehand was a theme, I think, for this tournament because Novak is the master of tweaking his game and making changes. And the two winners, the two champions of this tournament were people who were willing to change.
Mm.
And, she started putting air under her forehand and hitting a different type of shot. And she hit her backhand awesome and hard as she always does, but she gave herself more margin on the forehand, and against a player like Sabalenka, that was just a brilliant strategy. Plus her foot speed, her defense, her movement, and she knew that eventually she would frustrate a player like Sabalenka, and it was a master game plan.
It really was, and it has to be something. I know Sabalenka had a rough one in the second and third sets, but it's something when that player gets that extra ball back, that 99% of the tour you're putting away, but there's that 1% that's extending the point and letting some doubt creep into you. She's just so mature for her age, and she's so balanced. And I know there's a lot of, who gets credit and who should. I mean, obviously she deserves the most credit because she's the one out there doing it, but it does take a village in this state. She's so grounded. You can tell by how she was brought up, the coaches she brought on, high quality individuals themselves, and just her team, that she was prepared to handle this moment. And the speech was phenomenal too. I would agree with one of my coworkers here, John Wortham. I don't really know many Coco Gauff haters. I don't know if there's anyone out there, maybe a few, but I haven't seen them. She's got a pretty high approval rating.
Oh, and her approval is just going to blow up after winning this tournament, the way she handled herself with so much grace. And the interesting thing is, when the protester interrupted her match and glued himself to the floor, that made national news outside of the world of sports.
Mhm.
So she's going to start to become a household name, and it's a great name with a good ring to it. So now people who don't even follow tennis are starting to understand Coco Gauff and who that is. And then she finished it up by winning the tournament. I think her marketability is just going to go sky high.
And having been a seasoned pro only at 19 is going to help her weather the storm, because unless you're, I mean, the very, very best all time, there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be waves. We saw that with someone like Ben Shelton this year, where there's going to be highs, there's going to be lows. She's able to manage that. And I think it's, another thing that goes without saying for people like us, but only one winner each week. So she's able to regroup, handle the losses, and shine brightly. It's cool to see. It's something that's good for the sport, and it caps a major year where, look, there's been a lot of quote unquote, fluke champions or people that have come out of nowhere. You look at the four ladies that won majors this year, and I'd even throw Vondrasova in there because she came along strong at the end of this year. These were pretty elite major champions. I think we can look at 2023 as crowning some of the best in the game.
Absolutely. And keep in mind, just to take you back to the thing you mentioned about her coaches and the coaching changes that she made, and all credit to Brad Gilbert. But remember, there were several moments in the tournament where she waved them off,
Mhm.
including the final, and said, when she was in trouble in the first set, and said, I need to just think and figure this out on my own. That's going to make her very popular. She has a track record. She was, as John Wertheim said, it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. So she was on the cusp, and her trajectory was headed in that direction anyway.
Mhm.
So this, you're right, this is great for the game.
Yeah, it certainly was. There's not much more to say, just to see where this goes at 19 and just getting better. Iga's still going to be around. Sabalenka had that unbelievable consistency, making the semis every year. And you have a lot of depth. I would hearken it with this, Amy. I think that there is depth at the top, and there's, a group of 6 to maybe 10. Obviously, there's some on the outside, but players like Muhova, who looked like a top 10 player at the end of the year, got to another major semi. I think we're starting to see that depth at the top slowly come to be. It's a hard act to follow with the Williams sisters and everything that's gone through, but we're starting to actually see depth at the top of the WTA.
Absolutely. I think it's ideal because we're starting to build rivalries among a group of elite players. The randomization is less now, and we're starting to coalesce around a group of probably 8 to 10 players who are just a level above, especially in terms of serve and return. So this is going to help build rivalries. It will help build excitement when any of these 8 to 10 players play each other, and it'll just improve the fun and excitement of the women's game.
Certainly will. There's a lot of unpredictability, except for maybe Egon Clay. I'm not going to say there's unpredictability there. That'd be the one that would shock me. The person that dethrones her. That's going to be a tough task, but we'll see. I did want to mention, because you brought this up, you're firmly in the camp though that the Sabalenka thing wasn't a legit racket smash.
Oh, I don't know. I really don't know. I need to do a little bit more checking, because I do know the guys who produced the Netflix series. So I want to figure out if that was their camera or
Yeah.
not. But then it could have been a Photoshop. Who knows? Either way, Mitch, the bottom line for me is that it is fine to react that way, and it's human. It's human
Mhm.
nature. Who hasn't, thrown a pillow or smashed a racket or done something in a moment of frustration? These players have to have an
Yeah.
outlet.
Yeah, 100%. That's a natural reaction. If it wasn't, no, not commenting. I don't have any inside intel, but if it wasn't something staged, then I'm not really sure. I feel good about it getting out. Like that's, I still think the locker room in all sports should be a sanctity. That there's things, especially we talk about team sports, there's stuff we shouldn't see on the outside. So that's my old man pet peeve thing there. But that said, I mean, it goes back to one of the guys you cover frequently. Roger Federer, his ability to shake off losses, like the story about him having like a party, a gathering after 2019 Wimbledon. I wouldn't be able to get out of bed for like 2 months. So he's just cruising with gas. So that's why there's only one Roger, I guess.
He got better as he got older about that. He really became like an elder statesman who was able to let this stuff roll off his back. Although he would tell you it still does keep him up at night or bother him.
Mhm.
But it's funny, leading into the closing arguments of this tournament, there were some things circulated on social media from Roger that had been from a decade earlier. And he wasn't always so saintly, or,
Right.
he said a few things that, like, I think he called one of Novak's shots a lucky shot after a loss.
Yeah.
But again, these players are human beings, right? And we have to
Mhm.
give them that leeway to be a human being.
We do post press conference after a loss, probably not the most mental clarity going on. So that's where I give everyone a pass. Last thing on the women before we move on, it was good despite the brutal loss at the end to see Madison Keys back in the mix. Wanted to talk about her. We've always talked about the upside of her game. Still think it's in that top 5 or 6 range when she's on. The floor has been the issue. She got better there. It was a tough one. But in looking at that match against Sabalenka, I don't think she fully gave it away. I do think Sabalenka took a large portion of that.
That match could have gone either way. I think she's really settled in with Fratangelo coaching her, and I still think she has a ton of upside. Her ground strokes are on par with anyone in women's tennis right now. You could argue even in men's tennis. Um, I think she'll settle in, and she'll probably look to pick apart all her matches, see what she did well, see what was working for her, see when to change direction, when to approach, and come out with a lot of positivity going forward.
Another impressive run by Madison Keys. We'll see where it goes. More with Tennis Channel Insight and with Amy Lundy here on the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Well, let's get to the men's event. It's another major title for Novak Djokovic, number 24. He wins his 4th U.S. Open, and there's a lot to discuss. And he's just extending his margin. He's just resetting what we define as being great. But 36 years old, where we weren't even sure how long his career would be, if he would even get to this point in the game, and he's winning 3 majors again in a calendar year. I just keep coming back to he redefines his game, he reinvents himself time and time again, and he's widening the gap somehow with the field.
And that one loss could have really gone either way, couldn't it? He's incredible. He's an inspiration, the way he plays. And like we alluded to before, here's a guy who he didn't have the serve that he had or that he has now early in his career. He didn't have the physical and nutritional practices that he now has. This guy will tweak and tweak and tweak and change, and it's an open-mindedness. So let's look at his opponent. Now, here's a guy who's taken a Medvedev, who's taken a deep return position, okay, and has his style of play and tries to play that style the best of his ability. But it's only gotten him one slam so far. And the question would be, is he willing to change? Is he willing to tweak his game? Because I think the greats, the big three, have shown that they are willing to evolve, change a grip,
Mhm.
change a serve, change something. And that's what makes them so great.
Yeah, I agree with that, but also he changes it and he's the best at it. So that's a pretty pretty rarefied quality. No, I mean, the other thing in this is tactically, he's just money every time too. Not only does he have all these gifts, but the mental game, as you said, he pushes the right buttons every single time. Serving and volleying, it's easy to say from the outside. Medvedev plays back, serve and volley. The efficiency that he does it on is remarkable. He had a couple half volleys when there were tense times in that moment from the deuce court. Every slider serve was perfect. He's at the net, and Medvedev's helpless. We can get into Medvedev maybe being a little stubborn and certain things that got him to this point, though, so it's hard to be too critical. But that second set, Amy, was an hour and 44 minutes. I mean, that's like longer than some motion pictures that are currently in theaters.
Yeah, like Barbie. When you take confidence and you add it with athletic ability, it's an incredible thing. Djokovic was 20 of 22 on serve and volley. That's 91%, if my math is right. That is stunning. Most players on the ATP Tour could not achieve that if you told them to go out and serve and volley 22 times, right? So there's also been a commitment and a discipline to practice these skills and to then implement them when the pressure is on.
Yeah, it's what can't you say about this guy? At a point, there's just we're running out of superlatives, and it's not slowing down. It's we had this discussion 2 years ago when we first did one of these things that at 34 he's better than 24. Is that a thing? Well, 36 and 26 is even crazier, and I might talk myself into it because he's just so smart out there, and he has a better serve, and he has just total command of the court. It's just good to see the human side of him as well. He understands also what he needs to do, how to ramp up. And as we saw in the semifinal match, he knows he's still at the top and he's not afraid to let these young boys know.
I've also been really impressed with his motivation because he already broke the record, and Nadal is injured right now and his status is unknown. So people wondered if this guy was going to be motivated enough to come out and give his all at this tournament. And it wasn't really even close. I mean, the motivation was incredible. And at 36, he's still the best in the
Mhm.
world.
Yeah, the motivation I think really is Carlos Alcaraz. It's now Ben Shelton is another one that's in there, and some other young players that are trying to come up. And he's like, I'm still at the top. And
Mhm.
the everyone's talked about the celebration that he did with Ben, hanging up the phone. And look, we can all kind of as sports fans agree that the content was great. I don't think there was anything malicious by it. It's competitive out there. If you were a 23 time at going on 24 major champion, you'd probably be a little perturbed that you're not the talk of the town. That's just a natural reaction. And also, as a general sports fan, I'd mind everybody out there, I'd remind them that if you have your own celebration, someone's going to do that when they beat you. That's just how sports works.
For a long time, I have been a big fan of the basketball player Dikembe Mutombo, who, whenever he blocked a shot, waved his finger, not in my house. And he would get mocked, Mitch,
Hmm.
sometimes.
Hmm. Yeah.
I said this on my other podcast. I asked my 13-year-old son, did you like what Novak did? And his answer was he liked both what Ben Shelton was doing and what Novak was doing. He thought it
Hmm.
was great, had no problem with it. So I think it's funny and I think it's great.
It gets heated out there. We forget that it's super competitive. It's competition in tennis at the ultimate level. And Look, that might be the biggest ringing endorsement of Ben Shelton's entire run, that he invoked that reaction out of Novak Djokovic, because he's probably not doing that to someone he doesn't see as at least somewhat of a threat. So, I mean, I'm curious to see where the Ben Shelton run goes. It's still wild to me that this guy peaks in both hardcourt Grand Slams after such a dismal summer. I mean, spring, summer, into fall now. But in big matches, he is money, and he has a lot of gifts that could give a lot of people problems for the next decade or so.
I think it's really cool that he's kind of brought his brand of college tennis. And, as Joel pointed out on my podcast, Joel Drucker, there was coaching allowed in college, and now there's coaching allowed. So he's made a really seamless transition. And I'd love to see more players do that. I think Shelton is super marketable, great smile, great serve, tricky player, super athlete, and things are looking up for both Shelton and American tennis.
Yeah, he was the one that carried the mantle. There were some disappointing performances in American tennis throughout the major, but Shelton carrying it and carrying it strong. So we'll see where it goes in the pecking order there. I did want your thoughts, Amy, on Daniil Medvedev, because the final is going to leave a bad taste in his mouth and maybe the viewing public. But I thought that match against Alcaraz was some of the best tennis. I would go out and say it's the best match he's ever played. And I just love him in this game, in this spot, being in the mix. It's good to see him finally getting one over on Alcaraz, but also being in the forefront, because the game, the personality, the unorthodox approach to everything is just special, regardless of him, unfortunately, for him not winning the major.
This is one of my favorite topics to talk about because he's really interesting to me as a player. He's this tall, lanky guy who doesn't play with a ton of power. He's Mr. Redirect. He does not go to the net despite his height much. And he has a really unorthodox sort of attitude and way of being. We saw him give it to the New York fans. They gave it right back to him. He's a super interesting player. I just want to see him change his game, Mitch. I want to see him
Okay.
mess around with the far back return position. And I do want to see somebody with that kind of height work on some set plays like they have in soccer,
Mhm.
set pieces where he comes in and approaches and finishes.
Do you think that'll happen, though? I mean, have you seen this guy? It's like the Batman Dark Knight. Do you know this guy?
A really amazing coach, a guy who used to coach CC Bellis, once said to me, if you stick to the way that you enjoy playing the game, then good for you. If you're an aggressive player and you like to go after it like a Sabalenka or something like that, and you have
Mhm.
your game plan and you're enjoying yourself, then good for you. But if the results are not what you want, then you're going to have to make changes. So it all depends on if the results are not what he wants.
Well, a couple of things. One, and I say this somewhat jokingly, I need someone like you or someone in analytics, because I feel like he tracking how many times he backs up, like his backward running backward steps when we would all think, oh, he's coming to the net. He just retreats to the baseline. I feel like he leads the tour in that unofficial stat. The other thing, too, and you brought up Sabalenka, it was running through my mind when you said that. The fact that both of them have major titles, maybe that's why they're like, I don't need to adjust. And you could say that it might sacrifice future success down the road, but the fact being, if his career ended today, he is a major champion. And I do think that might make him more hesitant to change anything.
I give him a pass on this one because he did beat Djokovic in the 2021 US Open final. So he didn't really need to change until such time as it didn't work for him anymore.
Was
So,
that,
yeah.
yeah, was that Alcaraz match, in your opinion, then more on Carlos's inability to succeed at the levels that we're used to, or did Medvedev raise his level and what he was strong at?
Medvedev himself said after the match he was in the zone. And anyone who's ever played a sport, any sport, knows what it's like to be in the zone. It's not something that you can pre-plan, and it's like holding water. It's elusive, so you can't then predetermine that you're going to do it again. So, for whatever reason, he was relaxed. Everything was going right for him. Carlitos played, in my opinion, a bit of a one speed on the ground strokes, which was hard. and
Hmm.
that is pretty much right into Medvedev's wheelhouse. So
Hmm.
um, it was on that night with that ball in those conditions, it was a bad matchup for Alcaraz, but
Hmm.
waiting with bated breath to see what happens the next time those two guys meet.
We know Alcaraz makes adjustments. He's like AI. He just gets better and better. It was really only one bad set. It was the second set. Set one was great. It was, I think 5-all in the tiebreaker. We were getting close to that. It was one mini break made the difference. And, I do think the conditions favor Medvedev. And yeah, he had a good match. That's why, Carlos handles everything perfectly, especially the media afterwards. He understands that every loss can be a learning experience. And looking at his future, obviously he's 20 and he's got two majors, and the path is there. I keep saying this though, and I don't want to sound crazy, but if he gets to like 10 or 12 majors and that's it, I don't want us to be like, oh, this is a failure, because that is so many majors and we're forecasting and projecting greatness on him because of who he's following. There's going to be ups and downs, even for someone as talented as him, as I keep coming back to. And just to put a bow on it, I do think he'll adjust. And the next time he plays Medvedev, looking at a different outcome.
That is a great and interesting point. The accomplishments and the tallies, the Grand Slam tallies of the big three should not dog him for his entire career, because as the tennis viewing public and fandom, we've got to be able to enjoy what he has to offer in and of himself.
Certainly does, and something that we're going to file forward. Any final thoughts on the men's side, stuff that stood out, as we, I guess, look forward to what 2024 brings for Djokovic, Alcaraz, and the rest of the tour?
I think you mentioned that in the women's game, we're getting a little bit more of a bunching of talent toward the top. I think in the men's game, it's even more refined than that. So we're just talking about a handful of players who are two notches above everybody else right now. So it'll be incumbent upon the guys who are ranked basically 4 or 5 to
Mhm.
75 to come up with something else. The chess move is yours, guys.
If you had to, know, this isn't a bold take or prediction, but outside of Djokovic and Alcaraz, if you saw anybody else winning a major or getting close enough, a finalist or whatever, who would be the next closest to actually holding the trophy besides clearly the top two in the game?
I would say Holger Rune, but he's hurt right now and he's just shaken up his entire coaching regime. But I
Yeah.
think he's a fantastic athlete. He's an all court player, an all surface player, and has a tremendous amount of upside.
That's a good one. Just hope they don't put him on the court 5 or whatever, in his
And he
track to get
needs
there.
Mitch, he's got to get over that, right?
Yeah. Well, he it's the gift and curse of being young, similar to Ben Shelton, is the fact that he's young. He has this exuberance, and there's maturity that's gonna happen along the way, we hope, and I assume will happen. But it's also a good thing. He doesn't fear Alcaraz. They were peers together. He's beaten him before. Like, he knows. It's weird when you're the same age as someone, they're just a guy to you. Like, they're not, even the older group sees him as this threat coming up, taking what's theirs. I don't think Holger fears Carlitos like that.
No, and he's beaten Djokovic as well. So I also give an honorable mention to Ben Shelton.
Mhm.
Just love what he does on his serve. Let's see how he deals with becoming more well known in the tennis world.
Wrapping up on Tennis Channel Inside In with Amy Lundy. This has been fun. Two more things I wanted to get to. One is the unfortunate serious side of things. We saw this Simona Halep story break yesterday as we record this, and they upheld the 4-year ban for a doping charge. Essentially, 1 year has already been served, so it'd be another full 3 years, which could be a career ender in all likelihood, given her age and the miles that she's put on. It will be going to arbitration though, so we'll see how it gets resolved. But unfortunate, and another unfortunate circumstance involving drugs in sports, but also a player that, if she's telling the truth, is getting her livelihood taken. We'll see how it plays out. Again, no judgment here, but just an unfortunate situation all around that's marring the game.
Very difficult, very like gut punching news. I will say that as an American, and I was a political science major, so I have a certain knowledge of and bias of the American system. In this country, you're innocent until proven guilty. And I think that's a pretty good standard. And I noticed when I read the statement that they had concluded that she had likely, very likely been doping. So, unfortunately, the burden of proof is on her,
Right.
and that is seems a bit unfair. But at the same time, as you said, we can't have doping, we can't have cheating, and we can't even have anything close to it.
The only two things, and that was well said, the only two things I would add would be, one, it would be nicer to see the process sped up to get a
Yes.
resolution quicker. And I know that there's external circumstances that I am certainly not privy to for why that might not be the case, but it would just maybe a wishful thinking to speed it up. The other thing is there is a track record for this being reduced. Head Maya comes to mind. It was 4 years. They said it was an accident. They reviewed and said it was an accident. So it ended up being 9 months. She was obviously younger and resumed her career. So remains to be seen. We're going to wait till this plays out, but unfortunate that a couple-time major champion, Simona Halep, is still under suspension. And the last thing, I had to bring this up because he's one of my favorites, one of yours as well. But with the Davis Cup going on, Stan was taking a couple shots there at, maybe the person that's been sabotaging it the last couple of years. But Stan Wawrinka not too happy with how the Davis Cup's going. Gerard Piqué was part of the ownership group that kind of changed the format of it. And I don't know if you saw this, Amy, but it was getting a little snippy online.
Yeah, that's really tennis insidery stuff, all the Davis Cup things. Piquet being involved in it, he's not really a tennis guy. I know I'm maybe in the minority on this, but I still would like to see that event completely organized, not spread out so much, and the essence of the event where the fans play the home matches and the home fans can be there to root on their players, that essence of it kept, and maybe some more, really well thought out intimate settings. But frankly, Mitch, sometimes I get surprised that the players care this much about it.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe that's the good thing. I think we all just love what the Davis Cup was. We'd like to see it go back to that, the home ties and the difference. And, for all the talk about, maybe loosening the belt a little bit, for lack of a better metaphor, on tennis and making it seem, more casual, more rowdy at times. We saw that with the US Open. The Davis Cup was that. So we'd like to see, that environment come back. And it is, I guess it's a good thing, right? That they care. So Stan at his age, just still going strong is fun to see. Well, Amy, this has been fun. I guess we're going to have to go through, the ATP Tour, couple months left, year-end finals, and the WTA going to Cancun now. So there's a resolution we didn't see coming either.
No, and I think it's a good resolution for right now as we wrestle with these heavy questions about who's going to be involved in the governing of this sport. But yeah, I mean, it would just be great, like if this time next year, maybe we were a little more organized. And
Mhm.
based on some reporting from Simon Briggs in the Telegraph, give him credit, it looks like the two tours may be in talks to potentially merge. So that would be a really exciting development that could bring a lot of new prospects for this sport.
Still some great tennis on the year. Amy Lundy, you'll be, tracking it all. We know that. Thanks you for coming on Tennis Channel Insight. And it's always a pleasure when we get to talk shop, and keep up the good work at Tennis Connected on the 3 podcasts and all the other platforms that you write and speak for. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Mitch. You keep up the good work too.